Episode 13, Conflict. Praise and glory belongs to Allah, the ever-watchful, the protector, the defender, the one who takes account of all things. Again and again I had established without a doubt that Allah Almighty has always been there in a most benighted way to aid and help me in an hour of need. Oh, Allah, my Lord, and my Maker, words cannot adequately describe the gratefulness that has pervaded my being and the thanks that I wish to utter in this regard. I can but say, oh, Allah, for this I thank you a millionfold and more. That Allah Almighty has chosen and elected to help, aid and back me in a special way, I must admit. It is the wherefore and why for that eludes me still, because at this stage I am still loath to say that I am the Mahdi. Oh, Allah in this matter preserve me from becoming a pretentious fool. Amen. Determined to find the answers, I resumed my pacing of the room, asking why did the Almighty, Lord of the universe, choose to befriend me in such a unique way? Then the episode of the conflict came to mind. Shortly after the confrontation with the Buzzy gang, in a moment of passing thought I reflected on all my recent fights. To say that I was not happy is to put it mildly, because on reflection every disagreement I had could only be settled by means of violence. I was 17 years old in Standard 9 in high school, and Allah willing the following year I will be in Standard 10. Those years when I was at high school, it was still regarded as a good education. According to my reasoning at the time, educated people do not settle their disputes by means of violence. Nay, they rather abhor it, because it is the way of the poor, ignorant, and unsophisticated. I definitely did not want to belong to this latter class. Silently I appealed to Allah to make my future a future free from situations where it will be necessary for me to lift up my hands in defense of my honor, or other such like causes. Did Allah listen to my prayers? Most definitely yes. 13 long years had passed before I was called again to do the honors. Admittedly there had been incidents from time to time, but Allah on high had extinguished the sparks before it could blaze up into fully fledged fires. I was 30 years old at the time, and on this occasion the antagonist was my brother-in-law Ahmad Latif, a man at the time who was and who still is happily that he came knocking on our door seeking the hand in marriage of my middle sister Tahira, who is the fourth eldest out of my 6 sisters. When he was betrothed to my sister, Ahmad was skinny, and I will not be amiss to say that he was even skinnier than me, but then he was 3 years younger than me. He had a fiery temperament, and this definitely does not work in tandem with a skinny physique, because sometimes when push comes to shove a bit of muscle is needed to stamp down your authority. To say that my brother-in-law was not contented to be skinny is to phrase it very gently. He was not just not contented, but he decided to do something about it, and he worked hard at it. Every opportunity Ahmad could get to put some muscle on his frame he took. His father was a cartage transporter, and Ahmad did not just drive his trucks, he also worked at competing with the laborers to load or offload whatever the truck would be carrying at the time, be it furniture, sand, stone, etc. He also toned up his muscles by working out with weights such as dumbbells and other gadgets which were available on the market for building a strong muscled physique. Then Ahmad joined a rugby club and took up the hard contact sport of rugby. In this game there can be no weaklings. And I say rugby more than anything else contributed to build up Ahmad's physique, stamina and strength, and Ahmad knows best. Being a rugby player, he worked hard at physical fitness exercises. One time he surprised us all. One early evening he ran all the way to and back from Maitland, the area in which he lived, to our home in Lansdowne. To give some idea of what this entails, a motor vehicle driving at a speed of 60 kilometers per hour cannot cover this distance to and fro under 40 minutes. From the day Ahmad first came to our home to about 3 years later on his wedding day, he had filled out quite nicely, so much so that I was skinny compared to him, to which the many wedding photos will so amply testify. In the beginning Ahmad had a lot of respect for me, and rightly so. To begin with, I am 3 years older than him, then I was older than Tahira and also her eldest brother. This was not all, because by the time he came knocking on my door my father had already left the home, so I was the figure, head of the household. It was to me that the most important decisions and tasks concerning my sisters were delegated, such as giving them away in marriage. It was only after he had cut his marriage that things started to change. His father was sickly and Ahmad received carte blanche in the business. He slotted into his new responsibilities like a duck takes to water, and as he asserted himself in his father's business, his dealings with people inside it as well as outside changed. This newfound power, coupled with a splendid physique which was under the control of a fiery nature, made for many explosive situations. Many were the scrapes that he landed himself into, and I dare say some of them were quite hairy, and always he came out on top. Right in the beginning, even before his betrothal to my sister, I knew that Ahmad and I was heading for a showdown, that it is only a matter of time and that it will end in violent confrontation. It was only the outcome of it that I could not fathom. About 1 year after this knowledge had come to me, I was having a conversation with my cousin, a baker who had emigrated to Australia more than 30 years ago. Somehow or another Ahmad's name cropped up, and he surprised me when he told me that he had noticed that Ahmad is short-tempered, and that sometime into the future Ahmad is going to lose his respect for me and fight with me. I surprised Abu Baker even more when I concurred and added that what he had just told me is nothing new, because I had intuited it more than 1 year ago, nay, in the very first week he had come knocking on my door. Abu Baker then asked me what I intended to do about it. I replied that I did not intend to do anything about it, but that I will cross that bridge when I come to it, and trust to Allah for the outcome. Ahmad's attitude, demeanor, and respect eroded towards me after he had married my sister. I noticed it right from the kick off, but elected to turn a blind eye and lend a deaf ear. I suppose that he had sized me up in his mind's eye, compared my skinny frame to his well-built body, and concluded that he could easily take me in a fight. Once Ahmad had decided that he could better me in a fight, he took more liberties with my person, and when I did not offer any resistance he made a mistake, because he thought this was a sign that I am scared of him. Unbeknown to him, I had made up my mind that I will only stand up to him the day he calls me out, and I knew it was coming as sure as the day follows the night. The day finally arrived that Ahmad and I squared off to one another. It took place 2 days before my sister Fatima's wedding to Faik, my father's sister's son. I had just finished constructing the outer walls to a maid's room and a triple garage on the grounds of our home. The area was big enough to comfortably accommodate seating arrangements for about 200 people, so Fatima decided to have her reception at home. It was my task to prepare the reception area. I had to construct a makeshift roof, fetch all the tables, trestles, and benches and put it all into place, and I had only 2 days in which to do all this. Before I go any further with my narrative, let me emphatically say that Ahmad, my brother-in-law, has got many good and outstanding qualities in him. One of them is to lend a helping hand where help is needed. True to form, he and his wife Tahira came to visit us the evening prior to the 2 days which I had left to get everything in shipshape. They came to see how we were making out and offered to assist and help where assistance and help is needed. After I had discussed with Ahmad what I still needed to do, he offered a helping hand. According to him, he did not have a heavy work load for the next day and was quite prepared to make not only himself but also his standby truck available. I gladly took him up on his kind offer of assistance. Together the two of us decided that first thing in the morning he will pick me up with the truck. We will then proceed to Weinberg to a hiring services company and load up everything that we need, such as crockery, cutlery, table, cloths, tables, chairs, benches, trestles, the works needed to make a wedding function successful. Once this stuff had been offloaded, then the two of us will proceed to construct and erect the temporary roof. That night, after he and his wife had left, I was in good spirits because with his offer of help a heavy burden had been lifted from my shoulders. True to his promise, Ahmad arrived the next morning bright and early. He had also brought his family with, that is to say his wife and son Joey, who was a baby at the time. The day started out on a good note. The two of us first had a good breakfast of corned beef, sandwiches and boiled eggs, which we washed down with orange juice and tea. This was his second breakfast for the day. He already had one before he had left his home. In those days his appetite had increased tremendously to complement the fine physique which he had developed, and there was not an ounce of fat on him. We did not waste any time and immediately after breakfast set off for Lower Piers Road, Weinberg, where the hiring services was located. When we arrived there we discovered that the loading bay of the truck faced the entrance to the hiring services, but the truck was standing on the opposite side of the road. This meant that we will have to cross the road every time that we load the truck. The traffic on the road was not heavy, so I did not mind, but Ahmad would have none of it. Quick to find an easy way out, he backed the truck up the road and maneuvered it in such a way that the truck was facing the wrong way, standing half on the pavement and half on the road, but its loading bay was conveniently next to the entrance to the hiring services, facilitating an unhindered and quick and easy loading. There were also other vehicles parked alongside the curb, so the only problem was that the truck was obstructing the access passageway to any other heavy vehicle traffic that wishes to come pass. I had pointed this out to Ahmad, but he had paid me a no, never mind. We had scarcely started loading when, true to word, a heavy laden truck came slowly rumbling down the road and grinned to a halt in front of Ahmad's truck, which was blocking it passage way. The driver waited patiently while Ahmad first loaded that which he had been carrying, but he took his time about it. Then nonchalantly he strolled to the front of his truck, got into the cab and attempted to start the motor. Whatever Ahmad did, the engine just refused to kick into life. After a few more attempts he shrugged his shoulders, lifted up his hand in exasperation, told the driver he has got a problem and that the truck did not want to start. The driver of the other truck was annoyed, but there was nothing he could do about it. He had no alternative but to back his truck all the way. He came right down to the corner, which was more than 600 meters away, and then turn his truck around and go down another road. When I looked towards Ahmad, he had a broad smile on his face and gleefully informed me that he had intentionally not switched on his ignition to start the engine. I was not only shocked but felt outrage as well. All he had to do was start up his truck and let it roll forward for about 1 meter. And the other's truck could have comfortably squeezed by and be on its way. This simple act would not have taken him more than 5 minutes of his precious time. Besides, Ahmad was in the wrong because his truck was parked on the wrong side of the road. To my way of thinking, Ahmad had intentionally abused that man, and according to me, that was unpardonable and unforgivable. Come to think of it, this was the third time in the past week in which I had been in his company that he had thrown his weight around in some bad way or another. I've had enough. This was the cherry on top of the cake. And although I did not voice my displeasure, I showed him that I was displeased by his action by not being my usual self. I became quiet and morose. I kept on brooding about this incident because I could not get the look on the truck driver's face out of my mind. After he had realized that he must reverse his truck all the way down the road to the corner before he could turn around and go another way, Ahmad and I loaded up his truck without further incident and then left for home. Back home we offloaded the truck and then started on the makeshift roof. The structure I had in mind was a simple one. Being a builder, I just knew what to do. Throw some long scaffold planks, of which I had plenty over the walls to bridge it from end to end. Then run a strut underneath the planks and support the strut by means of a prop here and there so that there are no sagging towards the center of the structure. Last, pull the canvas over the scaffold planks which are now serving as rafter, and presto, your makeshift roof is complete. I estimated that this work from start to finish would not take more than 2 hours, say 3 hours tops. My brother-in-law, who was not a builder but a cartage contractor, had other ideas. He wanted to make a more elaborate structure, and for this he had brought some long battens along. Although Ahmad knew the rudimentaries of carpentry, he was not a carpenter, but he assumed the role of such and delegated to me the task of fetch and carry. I myself am not a carpenter. It takes up to 30 years to become a fully fledged one, but I was a fair hand at it. Nevertheless, I offered no objections because the man out of own volition had sacrificed his time and effort to help and assist me. For this I was grateful and meant to show it. By the time lunchtime came around, we did not really make any headway, bearing in mind that the bulk of the moving was spent on loading and offloading the truck. This was also compounded by the fact that Ahmad was no carpenter. After lunch, Ahmad also decided to take his truck home and return by car, so it was well into the afternoon when he returned. We resumed work straight away. After we had resumed work, things started to go awry. The battens that Ahmad had brought with him must have laid a long time in the sun, because some of them were bent, crooked, and twisted by the heat. This makes it very awkward to work with it, but this was not the worst of it, because now they had become bone hard, making it difficult to nail them down. In Ahmad's case it was doubly so. Him not being a carpenter, he lacked the patience and finesse, as well as not having a knack for it made it a frustrating task. Most of the nails he used to nail down the battens either jumped away from the batten or bent because of the hardness of the wood. Sometimes Ahmad's hammer would also jump out of his hand and fall down to the floor 5 feet below. It was my task to retrieve the hammer, and I did it with stoic abandon. As long as the hammer fell inside our grounds there was no problem, but then Ahmad started to work on the boundary. It was a new ball game. The outbuilding which I had constructed abutted on the property of 2 of my neighbors, the one at the back and the one on my left. My household, that is to say my mother, all my sisters living with us, my small brother Zaid and I had amicable relations with the neighbor at the back. If Ahmad were to let his hammer fall onto their ground, it would cause no problems. I could easily retrieve it without even having to ask their permission to step onto their premises. With the neighbor on the left it was an entirely different situation. We did not enjoy a good relationship with them, especially with the woman of the house, who was very finicky. I knew Ahmad's clumsiness with the hammer will cause problems because she will not take kindly to being disturbed every time we ask them to retrieve a fallen hammer, or even if we should enter their property by ourselves to fetch it with or without their permission. When we started working on the problem boundary, I informed Ahmad about the neighbor and told him to be extra careful not to let go of the hammer. By his whole demeanor I could see he had not taken me seriously and had turned a deaf ear to my talks. We had started working when the hammer fell from Ahmad's hand and dropped to land on the neighbor's ground 6 feet below. Luckily the woman's son Mark was in their yard and I called out to him to please throw the hammer up to us, which he willingly did. Thank you very much. Scarcely 5 minutes had gone by and it was the same story. Again Ahmad let the hammer fall onto the neighbor's ground, but this time there was no Mark to pick it up and throw it to us. Nonchalantly Ahmad told me to fetch it. I had 2 options: 1, climb down to ground level, go all the way from our home to the neighbors and knock on their front door and risk a confrontation with the woman when I tell her that out hammer had landed on her property. 11, clamber 2 feet down the wall onto a 4 feet high vibrecrete fence and from there lower myself down and then jump onto their ground. Then quickly retrieve the hammer, climb back up before anybody could spot me. I chose option number 11, as I handed the hammer over to Ahmad. I with irritation in my voice told him to be careful because I cannot willy-nilly fetch the hammer every time. I had reason to be irritated. I still had not forgotten his handling of the truck driver this morning. I resented the elaborate structure he was making and the amateur way he was going about it. I did not mind being the fetch and carry boy, but the way he went about ordering me to do his bidding also rankled. This was the first time ever I had spoken to him in a bad tone of voice. He did not like it at all and immediately reacted to it. With an aggressive tone of voice he told me that he had noticed that I had been stroppy for the whole day and that if I am not happy then I must beat him up. His words in Afrikaans were "Slaan my sommer in my mower man." By the whole tone of his voice I gathered that he thought I was too scared to try, and even if I tried I will not be able to do it. While he was talking to me he climbed down to the ground to lend weight to his words and waited to see what I would do. In an equally aggressive tone I responded and said that I am not scared of him and invited him to do his worst. As I spoke I also climbed over the fence to confront him face to face. The long-awaited and fated day that my brother-in-law Ahmad and I squared off to one another to do battle had finally arrived. Right from the beginning, since I had first laid eyes on him, I knew it was coming, so the question that must be asked is, did I prepare for it? And I must say no. I suppose deep down I had hoped that it would never take place. On the day of the fight, how did we compare? How did we shape up? Ahmad, age 27 years, weight 180 pounds, all muscles and no fat, height tall, smoke, non-smoker, never smoked in his entire life, physical, superphy, makes vigorous exercises, have stamina and endurance, plays rugby in the first team of his club, which is one of the top local clubs. Shukri, age 30 years, weight 65 pounds, height tall, smoke 20 cigarettes per day for about 12 years, physical, unfit. What is lacking in stamina and endurance is made up for in resoluteness. Fighting experience, last fight 13 years ago ended in a stalemate. If we look at the statistics, it can be easily discovered that the only hope I had of winning this fight was Bob Hope. What game plan, if any, did I have before grappling with him? None whatsoever. Truth to tell, I was so livid that my mind was frozen in fury, so that I could not think coherently. It was so bad that I did not even pray to Allah for help and a favorable outcome. As we neared one another, we both raised up our hands waist high and balled them into fists. The time for talking was past and the action was about to begin.